Getting right into lighting. Here's a little joke thing, and God said, and then these are Maxwell's equations, right? Maxwell's equations, they're sort of a set of rules that fundamentally describe what we understand about electromagnetism. It covers the range from electricity all the way up to natural light. And they're immutable. They don't change. They can't be, can't be modified. And we really don't understand the basis of them. We just observe them, and then we make our observations about them, and that's our understanding, is based on observation and recording those observations and defining that observation. And that's light, right? Light in the real world. We make a light, we decide what color it is, and we decide it's going to be sort of bright, but we don't have a whole lot of control about what that light does while it's being light. We have complete control over the lights in Unity within certain exceptions, right? So we've got rules that we have to play in by AltspaceVR, but we can create any kind of lighting environment or lighting effect that we can think of within the tools that we have. Now this is really powerful. I mean, I can control how far a light extends, right? Unnaturally, the light doesn't naturally have a range, but I can give light a range. I can have light affect certain objects or not affect certain objects. And I can have different types of lights that affect different things under different circumstances. And so that's really powerful. The downside of that power is we have to do everything, right? I have to put the lights in, I have to define the lights and the color, and I have to sort of create the physics environment for my lights in my scenes. So it's kind of a mixed blessing, is kind of where I'm going with that. Now in computers, lights are calculated the same way as color, right? And when you think about it, the colors of what we're seeing coming off of our computer monitors or in the optics of our headsets is really just colored light, right? So it all comes down to lights and how colors are stored in a computer. Now typically color information is stored in what we call channels, right? So we've got a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel. Sometimes there's an alpha channel. If I'm dealing with transparency, you can use the alpha a lot of times to control whether or not something is transparent, but that's something for materials. We're talking about lights. So alpha really doesn't play a key role in light calculations, but whatever those values are for red and whatever those values are for green and blue, you add those together, and that's, well, all of them taken together is defines that color. How much red is in that color, how much green is in that color, and how much blue is in that color. With light, they can mix together, and usually they mix together by additive. So it's an additive sort of combination where I take the values for red, and I add those together, the values for green, add those together, and blue, and that's my new color when two lights kind of come together. Now, if I have enough lights all coming together, like at the center of the little graphic there, eventually it'll come out to white. All the different color combinations come together, and that makes white light. Very similar to the way it does in nature. White light is made up of all the colors of light just kind of coming in at the same time. In AltSpace, we have a particular lighting environment that we have to adhere to. Unity is really capable of some profound and dramatic lighting effects if you use it to its full capability and you use it on a machine that's actually able to do stuff like real-time ray tracing and refractions and reflections and stuff. AltSpace probably takes Unity's lighting and dials it down to about 30%, maybe, or so. But they do that for the same reason they have the other sandboxes. We have mobile platforms we have to support that may not be able to do all the stuff that a PC-driven VR rig is going to be able to do. And so, we have two different sort of groups of lights that are working in AltSpace. We have real-time lights that are active in the environment right now, and they can light objects that we bring in from a kit, and they light avatars, or at least they used to be able to. There's different types of lights that are real-time that work in AltSpace, point lights, and directional lights, and I'm going to talk about what the difference between those two are. But inside this real-time environment, while we're actually in here doing stuff, we don't really have a whole lot of light available to us that we can play with. we've got a light that sort of behaves like the sun, and if you look at your hands and you look at the other avatars, you can see that one side is shaded and the other side is lighter, and the direction that that shadow is coming from is sort of in the direction of the directional light that's in the scene. So that's a real-time light. It operates in real time and it operates on the avatars, and the avatars only. Inside the template, however, I've got baked lights, I've got another directional lights. I can have real-time lights that I put in the templates that lights up the geometry of the template. They used to light up the geometry of the avatars, but with the new avatar update, real-time point lights no longer light up avatars. Which is why if you go into a dark interior world like Ghostbusters, you go into Ghostbusters and all the avatars look like they're made out of charcoal. That's because the point lights that I put in there to light up the avatars no longer light up the avatars. AltSpace tells us that, you know, they're working on that, they're aware of that, so I'm sort of treating the situation as if that's going to change one day soon. But in the template, and this is probably my number one reason, or maybe one of my two top reasons for wanting to work in the template at all, is because of the control that I have over the lighting. The effects that I can make the lighting do in the template are an order of magnitude more impressive than what I can do with lights through objects and kits and stuff. Now, the different type of light entities that I have in Unity, I've got point lights and spotlights that really operate in a very similar way. I give it a point, and if it's a point light, that's all I have to give it as a point. And if I give it a spotlight, I have to give it a direction. Now, both of them, I give it a distance. And I think the default is like 10 meters. But I can stretch that out, or I can make it short. Like if I have a candle, right, I'll probably only want like a couple of meters of light around a candle, and then past that, it drops off to the point where I really don't care. I'm not going to notice any kind of effect that that light has. So a range of about 2 meters is probably fine for something like a candle. They all have colors, they all have intensities, and they have a range. So I can have a light that's very, very bright, but it only has a very short range. Or I can have a light, something that has a very subtle light, very low intensity, but yet it covers the entire scene, whatever's called for. I can specify whether or not it's a real-time light or a baked light. Unity also has something called mixed lights, which implies that, oh, it'll work like a baked light when I'm using baked lighting, and it'll work like a real-time light where I need real-time lights. And I get mixed results with mixed lighting. My workflow, it just seems to work better, and I get better, more predictable results if I separate the real-time lighting from the baked lighting, and I do the baked lighting itself, and then I go back and sort of design the real-time light informed by what the baked lighting looks like. But your mileage may vary. Maybe mixed lights works great for you. So I can put these lights in here. I specify whether or not it's a baked or real-time light, and then I can specify whether or not it casts shadows. And shadows is another big difference between baked lighting and real-time lights. Real-time lights only shade them, or objects in a real-time light in AltSpace only shade themselves. So I see the shading on the back of my hand, but my left hand does not cast a shadow on my right hand. So they don't cast shadows. They shade themselves, but they don't cast shadows. Now in baked lighting, objects can cast shadows. And they can cast shadows onto themselves, and they can cast shadows onto other objects. So the shadow type can determine whether or not I want a nice crisp shadow or I want something that's sort of hazy, right? Depending on the effect that I'm looking for. Directional lights operate differently from point lights or spotlights in that they also only have a direction, but they don't have a range. They don't have a radius or a depth that they go. They behave like the sun. So the light coming off of a directional light, all of the rays are parallel to each other. They all go in the same direction. They also ignore things like roofs and walls. All of the geometry gets lit the same by a directional light. It behaves like a sun, and you can think of it like a sun. So that's only having a directional light to light our avatars is one of the reasons why outdoor scenes work better than indoor scenes now. Because our avatars are going to be lit like they're outdoor, whether or not they're outdoors or not. Area lights are a special case of light, and area lights only work for baked lighting. So I can't have a real-time area light. But what an area light does is I can specify, say, a region or a shape, and have like a shaft of light coming out of something. So you think of it like a window, like light coming through a window. And if I want to have an effect like trees outside that window casting shadows onto the floor inside of a room, that's exactly what an area light is for. It gives you a small area of intricately lit geometry. And if you look in your home world and you look at the ground right when you first come to AltspaceVR in your home world, I believe that the lights in that room, I can't tell just by looking at it, but I sort of think that's done by an area light, because that's the kind of thing that you would do with an area light is, you know, when you're in your home space and the lighting that's coming through the windows on the floor. I think those are area lights. Now, emissive materials, one of my favorite things, emissive materials. And you can look at it, they're all over this place, right? So the white stripes on the floor, if you look at the pillars, there's white columns, and you can see where the light is sort of coming up off of the materials. That's because emissive materials actually allow you to cast light onto the geometry around it. So I don't have to have a light object. I can have an emissive material, and that material will cast its own light. Now this is really cool if you want to do, say, a neon sign, right? You get that effect where, okay, the neon sign, and it's up against the wall, and the wall behind the sign is lit up the same colors and the same shape as that sign. If I have that model of that neon sign, and it's baked into my template, then the bricks or the walls behind that sign will be lit by the same colors that the sign is using. It's a very useful effect. I'm going to be talking about it a lot. Are there any questions at this point? Anybody got any questions? I got hand raises enabled, so if you got any questions, feel free to raise your hand. I'm going to redecorate these slides real quick. Excuse me while I come through here. Pardon me, excuse me, pardon me. All right, next set. Baked lighting. I'm going to talk about specifically about the benefits of baking your lighting. So if you look at this image right here, I've got these panels of different colors on the wall, and they're emissive materials. So they're the colors that are coming off these materials are contributing to what they call the global illumination of the scene. And you can see how, especially on the back wall, the left side of the back wall is tinted sort of red, and the right side of the back wall is tinted sort of blue. That's because the light that's lighting up that back wall is in part coming from the blue patch and the red patch on the side walls there. Also, look at the corners of the shadows, or the shadows in the corners where the walls come together. That is an effect called ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion happens naturally where two objects start coming together. At that point where those objects come together, it gets harder and harder just for light to get down into that corner. So corners naturally just darken unless I'm actually directly shining a light into it. Ambient light darkens when it gets to the joining of two objects naturally. So ambient occlusion is an effect that you can get through baking your lighting. I can also have reflections, and there's something called light probes that you're really just sort of better off ignoring because they make the world very, very heavy. But I can put reflection probes in a space, and if I want something, maybe I don't want it to behave exactly like a mirror, but I want it to show reflections of the geometry around it, I can put reflection probes in my scene and bake those reflections into my materials as well. And as I said earlier, baking your lighting is the only way that you can have an object that casts a shadow onto another object in AltSpace. maybe not only, but if I'm faking the shadows otherwise. Like an interactable object. The interactable objects they have these days, you pick them up and there's a shadow on the floor or to the object. And if I throw it, I'll see the shadow move across the floor. That shadow is really just a piece of geometry that's on the ground that's painted like a shadow. Yeah, there's a hand raised. I didn't need to raise my own hand. Avasig, did you have a question?
Oh yeah. How many UV sets can you use?
You can use as many UV sets as you want. The difficulty is going to be accessing them. And then light map UVs are a different type of UV than like material UVs. Unity generates them, I don't necessarily create them. Now when I'm talking about materials, yeah, I can have as many UV sets as I'd like.
Can you use just one color channel on the light maps?
Not in Unity. I don't think there's a way to,
Okay.
I don't think I can separate out just the red channel. I could set them all to the same value, and that'd give me a gray object, some sort of grayscale object.
But can you modify the shaders so that let's say
You can do it with shaders.
So you can actually have 3 light maps in one texture.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, but now you're talking shaders. Now you're talking shaders. But yeah, it would.
Just one more question.
Mm-hmm.
Can you use texture atlases?
Yes. Yes.
Can you tile them? Can you tile?
Yes, you can.
Texture atlases?
Yeah, but once again, now I have to look for a specific shader that allows me to do that. I'm not going to be able to do that with just the standard shader.
Yeah, but if you make your own, you can make your own shaders.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I was wondering, at News and Updates last Saturday, Lorel said
Uh-huh.
something about, I wrote it down, she said something about because of the changes in lighting and AltSpace now with the avatars, she said use Unity layer 15, and I didn't know what she meant by that.
You will by the end of this today. You'll know exactly what she was talking about. Let's see. All right. What was that? No, yes, Unity supports real-time shadows. So the question was about if you use real-time shadows in Unity. Unity supports real-time shadows. Unity supports real-time ray trace shadows, which is something we won't see in here in an environment like this for years. But AltSpace does not. So it's an AltSpace limitation, not a Unity limitation. All right. Marty, you had a question.
Yeah, whenever you say that like Unity supports something but AltSpace doesn't, that means we could put it in our template, but it's not going to work when we get it in AltSpace, right?
Yeah, assuming it makes it into AltSpace.
Okay.
Yeah,
It might not even get that far.
It might not even get that far. Or it
All
may
right.
get into the space and just not work.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
RTX new cards that are coming.
Yeah.
I believe the AltSpace will have support for it in the future.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, there's going to be a lot of changes that have to happen before stuff like that is supported in AltSpace. And I don't know, AltSpace as AltSpace may never support this kind of stuff. Who's to say? That's anything I say on the subject is pure speculation. So, emissive materials. How do I make a material where I can add the color from the material to the global illumination? There's a couple of things that you have to do. First, in the material itself, right? So I'm selecting the material in the project, and this is the material in the inspector. I need to make sure that emission is set to true, and then I can give it a color. Once I give it a color, I want to give it an intensity of something higher than 1. Now, the higher that intensity is, the more light it's going to put out, but it's also going to wash out any kind of texture that I put on the material. So if I say I've got a light that's a ceiling light, right, and I've got a picture of the ceiling light, and the picture has a texture in it, and you know it looks like a light. As this intensity goes up, then it's going to wash out the texture, but it'll make the light that's coming off that material more visible. So a lot of times I don't even bother giving my emissive lights a texture at all, just a color, because you know I'm going to have them so bright that they're going to wash out any kind of texture that might be on it. Then the other thing that I want to do is in the then what I want to do is in the actual mesh itself, right? So I've got the game object here, and I'm looking at the mesh renderer. I want to make sure that contribute global illumination is turned on. Now, if I set something to static and it creates a mesh renderer like this, then that's probably going to be on by default, but I just want to check it and make sure that that's lit, especially for the objects that I want to have casting light into the scene. And really, that's all I have to do to make a material emissive in Unity. Once I bake the lighting, it's going to take that light and it'll light up the scene, hopefully exactly as I've designed it. Now, real-time lighting in the template uses what they call vertex lighting. That's what I was talking about, where it only lights up on the vertices, which gives it sort of its cartoony kind of effect, right? It doesn't cast shadows. It only shades itself. But on big things that are sort of at a distance, or things that have enough sort of geometry to them that I don't need them to cast shadows on, then that's a perfectly valid thing. And if something is animated, I really don't have any choice, but I have to use that information to decide what do I want to have animated and what I don't. If you guys have, some of you have seen the new world I've got, where I've got like big floating metal ships, right? And one of them's kind of floating around in the sky. The one that moves has to be lit with a real-time light. It can't be lit with baked lighting like the rest of the geometry because it moves. Layer culling masks. Here, this is the answer to your question. Layer culling masks. So I can have different layers in Unity, right? So I can, and we talked about how things that I want to be able to teleport onto need to be on layer 14. Now they call that layer nav mesh, but the name of the layer doesn't really matter as much as the number of the layer. So layer 14 is what anything needs to be on if we want to teleport onto it. Same thing with avatars. Avatars need to be on layer 15. Layer 15, no, avatars are on layer 15, but I need to make sure that my light lights layer 15 in order for it to light up the avatars. And a culling mask is a way that I can go through and I can specify which layers my lights affect. So by default, they're going to light up everything. They'll light up even the nav mesh layer, my water layer, my UI layer, my lights by default light up everything. But if I don't want them to affect objects on one particular layer, I can go to this culling mask and I can uncheck whichever ones I don't want my light to work on. So when I'm making my directional light for my avatars, I make one of them that's baked, and then I point that in a particular direction. I make another one that's real time, and I point that in the same direction, give it the same colors, give it the same intensity, give it the same everything. It's just the only difference is the layer mask. My real-time light only lights layer 15. So 15 was avatar, and then 10. One of the devs told me that I need to light layer 10 too. Didn't tell me why. Didn't tell me what's on layer 10. But he says you want to light layer 15 and 10. 10 is questionable. I can't tell any difference with 10. If I light 10 or if I don't light 10, I can't tell any difference. But layer 15 I know is the layer that avatars are on. So if I want to have a light in my scene, a directional light that lights up my avatars, it has to be on layer 15, and I have to have a layer mask on my other lights that don't light layer 15. And, oh, here's the lighting for avatars thing. If I'd looked behind me, I would have seen that I was getting ready to do this. And you can see here what the difference is between the a world that's got a directional light in it that's made to light up the avatars and a world that doesn't. So the top light, the top image comes from Ghostbusters. You can see the Stay Puft. The point lights no longer work to light up the avatar. The directional light I haven't put back in here, so I haven't gone in and fixed Ghostbusters, so I haven't given it a directional light. So there's no details on the avatars. You can't see the eyes, you can't, and none of that stuff lights up because there's no lighting for the avatars. But in a nice space like one of the AltSpace templates, or your own world, once you've put the lighting in, you get nice highlights and shading on the avatars. And that's the difference that one real-time directional light makes for the avatar lighting. Does that answer your question? All right, we're almost to the end. The lighting settings panel is so important that I just dock it to my user interface. I get to it by going to window, rendering, lighting settings, and then I just leave it because I'm probably going to be working in this panel as much as any other panel in my scene. And it's so important that I'm giving it 3 slides in this presentation today. So first of all, we'll start at the top of the panel. It's a really big panel. It takes up the whole user interface. I can set my skybox in there, and this is important, and it's part of lighting because the global illumination of the environment can come from the skybox. So I can have the skybox, and the colors from the skybox can help Unity light up the geometry of my template by figuring out what color light needs to be coming from what direction. I've got this gradient source where it says environmental lighting. Right, so that's environmental lighting, that's a real-time sort of thing. And I can have different sources for my lighting in my avatar. And this does affect avatars. So really there is another way that I can affect lighting in my avatars is by changing these, the sky and the equator and the ground colors. So that's light that's coming from the top, the sides, or the bottoms. But only if I select gradient. I have other choices for either a solid color, or I can also set that back to skybox. But in AltSpace, skybox doesn't work. Only gradient works. And it's also a very subtle effect. It's the only effect still lighting the avatars in Ghostbusters, which is why you can see the avatars at all. But it's not going to give you any kind of bright or dramatic light. It's going to be universal over the entire scene as well. Real-time lighting, don't even bother with it. They're talking about real-time environment lighting, which doesn't work in AltSpace. So you might as well just minimize that tab. And then I want to make sure that I have baked global illumination checked. Now the lighting mode, it's going to give you a few different options for lighting mode. But for AltSpace, it really doesn't matter a whole lot, especially if you're on a Quest. You're not going to be able to tell any real appreciable difference between the lighting modes. So might as well just leave it at Shadow Mask. Same panel again, just a little bit further down. Right? This is where it gets really complicated. I've got different ranges of samples. You've got direct samples, indirect samples, and environment samples. And by default, they're usually much higher than these. I think they're at 32, 256, or 512 and 256 respectively. And those control the quality of the baked lighting, but also how long it takes for the lighting to bake. Every time I click this generate lighting button, it can be a lengthy process. It takes about 10 or 15 minutes for my computer to bake the lighting in this world, for instance. But I can control how long it takes to bake that lighting by giving higher or lower numbers to my ranges of samples here. Higher samples, I get better, more precise, more accurate shadows. It also takes longer for Unity to bake my lighting. I get a similar sort of thing for light map resolution. when Unity's baking its lights, it goes through and it sort of unfolds all of the geometry in the scene, and it generates new textures to put on top of that. These new textures contain the light and the color information that's going to get added to the material to determine what the final color of any particular point of your object is. So the shadows that I see in the geometry around my template, those shadows are contained in textures that Unity calls a light map. And those add to the weight of the world. So by giving it a value for light map resolution and in pixels per unit, what that means is that for every 1 unit, and a unit is a meter, right? So for every meter of space, there are 20 pixels the way I've got this light map set up. So it's going to use 20 pixels to calculate the lighting in that 1 unit square of geometry. Now geometry gets complicated because now it's a function of not just size but surface area. So if I have a piece of complex geometry that's quite small, I can still have a really big light map once Unity unfolds all that surface to figure out how it's shaded. I can have a really big piece of geometry that doesn't have a whole lot of detail to it, and it still takes up about the same space in my light map because it's all flat polygons and I'm not having to calculate the surface area of something. So the size of the geometry in your world, as well as the complexity of the geometry in the world, go into making up the size of your light map. I can also control the size of my light map by changing that resolution. If I change that 20 to a 40, then I'm telling it I want 40 texels in my per unit in my light map instead of 20. And it's going to increase the size of my light map accordingly. It's also going to take it longer to build, but that's okay. It'll also increase the quality. So there's a fine line, right? It's a balancing act between quality and how long I want it to take to bake, and quality and how big I want my template to be. Sometimes I may have to sacrifice quality for size. If I'm designing a world that I want to be used in a featured event, then I may have to rein back the quality on my shadows in order for my template size to be small enough to fit within the restrictions. Ambient occlusion is something that you will want to turn on. That is the thing that generates the shadows in the corners where objects come together. And it's in my mind, it's one of the key things to making a scene look somewhat believable, because that effect happens in reality, and when we see a piece of geometry that doesn't do that, our brain sort of don't buy into it, or we know it's not real. But when we do see it, it seems a lot more believable. All right, so I'm being told that my audio is breaking up, and it's 2:38, right on time. So I will be back momentarily. Please don't go anywhere. Talk amongst yourself. The subject is lasagna. The last thing that I want to talk about on this, ambient occlusion. You really shouldn't have to mess with any of these. By default, they give you a fairly realistic result. But if I want more pronounced shadows for whatever reason, say a particular a stylistic reason, then I can crank that distance up, or I can crank the indirect contribution up, and it will sort of make the shadows in the corners more dramatic, if that's something that you're looking for. The other thing that you may want to use is fog. Now, fog is a real-time effect, right? So it you probably not going to see it. Well, you will see it if you turn it on in the scene, but it just fogs out stuff as it moves away from you, and you pick a solid color for your fog, and it doesn't behave like a layered fog or anything. It's just as things get further away from you, they sort of fade into a different color. The downside of fog is it doesn't affect skyboxes. So if I had fog in this scene, I really would only see the fog affect the geometry that's part of this base right here, and I'd still see the skybox exactly the way it is. So skyboxes sort of break the fog effect. They're best for scenes that don't have a skybox, that have, say, like a solid color off in the distance. And they're good for indoor environments, like caves or mines or underwater, right? So if I say I'm building an underwater scene and I just want to make it look like the geometry just sort of fades off into the water, if I give my fog like a nice deep aqua blue, it's gonna give me a pretty convincing underwater effect just to start. And then the last thing at the bottom of this panel, this auto generate is it is the source of all evil, and you need to turn it off just immediately, because once you start baking your lights, right, every change I make to the geometry is going to want to regenerate the lighting. And if it takes 10 minutes to generate the lighting, I don't want it to do that every time I move something. No, turn it off, and then you control when it bakes the lighting by hitting the generate lighting button. And if your lighting is a little bit broken for a little bit while you're moving some stuff around, then so be it.
Yes, but when I asked the question about how many UV sets, I was actually referring to AltSpace, not Unity, but...
Oh, well, in terms of AltSpace, I would imagine, I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to that question for a hard and fast fact. Speculation, I think it'd work just fine, but...
yeah, okay. But it's just try and see.
Yeah, just try it and let me know what you find out.
Yeah.
Bernie, you have a question.
Yes, I do. And you're talking about the lighting. Actually, the slide still up there behind me says you need 2 directional lights, one for geometry baked, one for avatars. So should those be both pointing in the same direction then?
Yes, both.
So you have consistency.
Yep. Same direction, same size. Same. You could probably do that, and I just get inconsistent results with mixed lighting. I don't know what I'm doing wrong with mixed lighting. I guess I don't trust it. It's scary and newfangled. I don't know. It's just my workflow is to separate the baked lighting from the real-time lighting. And so I tend to really only think of one of them at a time. I don't know. Your mileage may vary. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, and maybe mixed lighting is the way to go.
Okay.
Sure. Okay, so now that we've talked about the button or the checkbox of ultimate evil. Oh, another hand raised. Hang on a second. Oh, that was Bernie's. Never mind. At the very bottom, you'll get this little dialogue that tells you how many directional light maps that you have, right? And it'll tell you, oh, I took your scene and I broke it up into 5 1024 by 1024 light maps. And the resolution of these light maps is something that you can set as well. I usually do 1024 or 512, and I gotta be honest, I can't really tell a whole lot of a difference because it's the texels per unit that have the biggest impact on the size of my light maps, not the resolution of it. I guess there's certain situations where 512 or 1024 is going to make a difference in the size, but knowing exactly under which situations one or the other is better would probably involve some math, and I ain't got time for that. But it will tell you how big this light map data is. Now, this is the size before it gets compressed, right? So when it may be a scary looking number right now, but when I build my template, it's going to take this light map data and it's going to compress those textures down. And so the final size is kind of indeterminate, but it's always going to be smaller than this. But whatever it is, that gets added to the weight of the template. And it can really bloat your template. Let's see, the size of this template I think is 14 megabytes, and probably 8 megabytes for those is light map data. Now the rest of it's geometry, materials, textures. So it can be a heavy thing, especially if I start putting reflection probes in. If I put reflection probes all over, it's really going to increase the size of the size of the light map data. So I'm always cognizant of how big is my world, how big do I want the world to be. Sometimes I can tolerate a really big world. Something like Ghostbusters, I make it as big as I want. But if I'm going to be using it in events and I want people to get into it and move it around fairly easily, then I want to keep it very small. I need to keep an eye on the size of my light map and the variables that control the size of my light map so that my templates don't come out super bloated. A few design considerations when we're talking about lighting. There's an old adage, I think I heard it first when I was in film school, that if you notice the lighting, it's done wrong. And I tend to break this rule a lot. I like people to notice my lighting. I really like it when they come into one of my worlds and they go, ooh, look at the lighting. So I tend to scoff at that adage. You always want to make sure that you saved room for the backlighting data. So when you're going through and you're collecting your assets and you're figuring out which models and textures and materials you want to work with, bear in mind that it may very easily double in size once I get finished baking the lighting. A good adage to follow, especially if I'm trying to go for realism in an environment, is to show the light and the source. So if I have a light that is casting a green light, there should be something that glows green in the environment as well. A candle, a Christmas tree, whatever. I tend to break this rule a lot myself. I like the haunted house one. I don't show you where any of the light is coming from. I just put light, right? Just put light all over the place. And I sort of think that makes it a little more mysterious. I haven't heard anybody complain about it. But that's one of the reasons why I love emissive materials, because by their very nature, I'm showing both the source of the light and the effect of the light. And then I always tend to light the templates first. So I make my light in my template the way I want it to be for the template, and then I worry about, okay, well, how is the avatars going to look in this environment? How do I light the avatars so that this environment that I've created looks effective and the avatars look realistic when they're going through it? Of course, this assumes that we'll be able to light avatars again sometime. Okay, we have gotten to the end of my prepared material. If there are any questions at all, has anybody got, and I'll go ahead and unmute the audience while I've got a hand raise. Pause. Speak.
Hey guys. Sorry, I popped in late here, and I was looking at slide number 2 over there, and I noticed you have a halo texture turned on. I've never messed with that. It says RT effect. Is that, you say real-time effect? What is that?
Yeah, it's a real-time effect, and that's actually in the wrong spot. That's a mistake in the slide, because that's about fog. Right, and that panel right there, that bottom window of the panel, is actually just a collection of different settings. So I'm meant to be talking about the fog. Halo is it's a light effect that sort of shows up around the light. Same thing as a cookie. So a halo is like a lens flare. I can have a lens flare that comes off of like a flashlight or something. And then a cookie, the same, once again, like a flashlight or a car headlight, that's going to have a particular pattern to the lights, right? It looks like a headlight, right? It's hard to describe. It's got little circles and little swirls in it. That's a cookie. So if I put a cookie on a light, I'm trying to make the light that shines off that light have a specific look to it, like a headlight or a spotlight or.
Totally. That's cool.
In theater terms, it's called a gobo.
Yeah.
Called a what?
In theater, we call it a gobo. It's anything you put in front of a light that casts a pattern.
Gobo. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, man. I don't know where it comes from, but that's what we call it.
That's also how you can do caustics, like caustics underwater.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You know, you can put a cookie on a light and shine caustics down.
Mm-hmm.
Ernie.
Yes. Oh, are you here?
Oh yeah.
Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Yeah. I could hear you
Okay,
before
great.
you just had a megaphone.
Oh, okay. So I love your slides. Is it possible to get a copy of them? I know you sent them out couple of weeks ago, but I never received them, so I'm not sure how I would go about getting them.
Yeah, that was an issue. All right, so that thing I did a couple of weeks ago where I had one of my students send out messages to everybody, I was thinking I was being so clever, right? Except messages from hosts don't go to your message history. So, yeah, so nobody got that. Well, I put them on the Discord. So there's a world building channel on the AltSpace Discord, and then the Educators in VR also has a world building Discord. The focus is more on tours and tutorials than just general world building, but I posted them there as well.
Great, thank you.
And I'll put these up as soon as I get done with it. I'm also recording this, so as soon as I get the recording edited, I'll put it up as well. And I'm repeating it Monday too. Also, if you weren't here at the beginning, I'm planning 2 more of these because my schedule for the fall is about to get crazy, and I don't know how many of these I'm going to be able to do over like a week. So I've got this one today that I've done on lighting. Next week I'm going to be talking about materials and skyboxes, and then I'm going to wrap the series up by talking about animation. And then I'm probably going to take a break, maybe put these on a monthly schedule or find some other time in my schedule. I'm not sure what's going to happen with it. But all right. Karen, you had something else.
Yeah, just a comment and a question. My comment was, I'm watching your videos because there's so much content. I really appreciate this. This is just invaluable. I was telling Scourge earlier to have this information because it directly relates to AltSpace. But just a comment on the slides, as I'm going through and watching your videos, your slides are really clear on there. So I just do a screenshot, and then add my notes to that. So that's, for me, that works really well. So just a comment.
That's a good one.
A question
I appreciate
had,
that.
Sure. You really do. They're very clear, and then you can put them together with whatever notes you have as you're taking notes. But anyway, the question I had is, at some point down the road, would you ever consider taking your haunted house, which is absolutely awesome? That's the best world in this whole AltSpace, but would you ever consider doing a class on that and kind of breaking it down and showing us what you did? I mean, you've got, some really cool lighting in there, and of course a lot of animations.
Yeah, I would. I'd be happy to do that. I want to finish it first. It's because I say that about all my projects. I don't ever finish. I just stop working on them.
Yeah, I was going to say, you never really finish a project, do you? There's always something else to do.
Yeah, but yeah, I definitely plan on getting back to the haunted house, and then around Halloween I'm going to open it back up, and yeah, that might be a good time to do that. I'd happily break it down and show you how I did it. And
that would be awesome. That would be. I think everybody would love that.
Well, good. Hopefully by then we have point lights back on our avatars.
Would be great.
It would be great. It would be awesome. I'd love to have point lights back.
Yeah. The coolest effect I've seen with lighting the avatars as we are currently able to do is to create the directional light going upwards that creates more of an underglow firelight. That's a pretty cool effect.
Now, something I've been wanting to play around with, this directional real-time light that lights up the avatars can be animated. So that would be an interest. We could probably do some interesting stuff with that.
Wow, really? Wait, I didn't even think about that. Oh.
Yeah, we can animate that light.
The color as well, right? I would assume.
Yeah, any of the parameters. We can animate the intensity, the color, the direction.
Because it's a real time. Right.
Because it's real time, yeah. Yeah.
You can only have one of those?
I tried before with 2, but
it's going to wash everything out, I think.
Yeah, you gotta find a balance in that.
What if you use different colors? Like you had blue light coming from one direction and pink light coming from the other direction. I wonder if it would cast the right color lighting on the avatars on each side.
I don't know.
It can do that. It can do that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of situations where you're doing like a stage performance of some kind. You want to have
Mhm.
lighting from different directions and so on. So if you can, light characters at least on a stage. I mean, doing it in general when people can move around in 3D space is hard. But if you say, well,
Mhm.
most people are going to be watching it from one direction, then you can have
Right.
some lighting. Yeah.
Yep. Although, let's say I've got a stage light that's going up away from the audience, and I've got the audience sitting, logically what's behind that light. The back of the audience is going to be lit too.
Right. Good point.
So it's, yeah. Once again, but if I had point lights, I could do that effect with point lights, and the audience would still be dark.
Or better yet, spotlights.
Spotlights. Well, yeah, point lights, spotlights. Yeah. I know. They say they're working on it. They say they're working on it, and man, did they hear about it from me? Wow. Yeah.
Is it possible to light only specific objects?
Yes. Yes, by using a layer culling mask, right? So when I build my scene, right, the Unity uploader is going to want to put everything on layer 14 unless I check disable auto layers. So when I go into the build setting in my Unity uploader, there's a little checkbox there. It says disable auto layers. If I check that, then I'm responsible for making sure that the things I want to be able to teleport onto get put on layer 14. I now have to do that manually. But I can make any layers I want. I can have layer 23, layer 47, and I can have objects that are on layer 23 or 47, and I can have lights in my scene that only light those layers. Those lights are only going to affect those objects. But if I ever uncheck disable auto layers or those objects get on the wrong layer, then those lights are going to stop working.
You just totally saved me. For days, I've been trying to figure out why it keeps putting everything back on the nav mesh. You're right, I keep forgetting to uncheck, because every time you open
Yeah.
project, it doesn't save your preference on that. You have to uncheck
No,
that every time you open Unity.
Yeah.
It's irritating.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good. Well, I'm glad. Well, then some benefit came out of this.
Just tired of people standing on my tables, you know?
I know it. I know it. It's fine. I didn't want anybody to be able to go up on there. You can't teleport on any of that.
Nice.
Anyway, well, thank you so much for coming. I look forward to seeing you all again at what is our penultimate session next week. Thanks. And thanks for your questions, your participation. I love the exchange this group gets, man. It's and I want to see your worlds. Build some worlds, people. Take me on a tour, and let's see what you guys come up with. Oh, Mr. Yellow's why? What? I got to build more? Yeah. What do you ever do around here? That's cool. That's cool. All right, guys. I gotta run. I will see y'all later. All right. Bye-bye.